Welcome back to a study on Genesis. We're looking at Genesis chapter 10, Noah's Descendants. Remember, the Bible is a library of 66 books, and we're looking at the first book of the first 5 books, Law of Moses. The patriarchal age. During this first period of Bible history, God ruled men through the family heads called patriarchs. Beginning with the creationist Bible age, reached all the way through the time of Moses and Exodus for God's people from the land of Egypt. Genesis chapter 10, 1 to 32 deals with the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The descendants of Noah came down from the mountains of Ararat. They travelled through the valley of Mesopotamia and settled in the land of Shinar. After the great flood, the earth was repopulated by the 3 sons of Noah, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. Their descendants will become the nations of the world with their various languages and cultures. The Japheths will go mainly north and east. The Hamites will go mainly west and south. And the Semite nations, including the Israelites, will come from Shem. So we have a basic map of different areas. You see Ham down here, Shem here, and Japheth going that way. So Genesis 9:24-27 gives a prophecy of the future descendants of Noah. It's a prophecy that foretold a curse upon Canaan and a blessing for Shem and Japheth. Genesis 10 gives a fulfillment of that prophecy in the table of nations. In verse 5 of this chapter we are told that the division of the nations were based upon 2 criteria: after his language, after his people. Genesis 11 goes back and tells exactly how this division was accomplished in the confusion that took place at Babel. So a comparison of Genesis 9, 10 and 11. Therefore is a sense in which the action of Genesis 11 takes place before that of Genesis 10. This is a normal pattern we've seen in Genesis. First we are given the overview and then we go back to look at the details. So Genesis 9:24-27, prophecy of the nations, curse on Cain. Genesis 10, table of the nations, description of Nimrod. And Genesis 11, division of the nations, the focus on Babel. The sons of Noah are normally listed as Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The sons of Japheth who are the first. It is the sons of Japheth who are first presented to us. This is because, from the point of view of the author and his readers, Japheth is the least important. The focus of the narrative will lead us from Japheth to Ham and finally to Shem. The order of birth of Noah's sons was Japheth, then Shem, then Ham. Just as Adam's son Seth was chosen to carry the seed line forward from Eve, Shem was chosen to carry the seed line forward from Noah. Just as the age of Adam at the time of Seth, the true seed, was born, is given, so Noah's age at the time of Sheth's birth is given as 500. And these are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah. The sons were born to them after the flood. The book of Genesis doesn't suffer from a lack of popularity. Many have undertaken to read the accounts of creation and the fall, of the murder of Abel and the flood of Noah. But as they come to Genesis 10, they usually transform into speed readers, and within seconds they're passed over this section of scripture. The table of nations, as found in Genesis 10, is unique among the writings of antiquity. Most of the ancient literature we have found are interested primarily in their own origins. It's rare to find a work that even attempts to catalogue the ethnic origins of the entire human race. The purpose of the Table of Nations. There are several important reasons for this chapter being in the Bible and for its inclusion in the book of Genesis. To demonstrate the fulfillment of Noah's prophecy as found in Genesis 9. Chapter 9 concludes with the curse of Canaan and blessing upon the descendants of Shem and Japheth. And as we turn the page, we are brought into the fulfillment of that prophecy. This shows the faithfulness of God in always keeping his promises. To give the background for the account of the Tower of Babel, as well as the rest of Bible history. This serves as a reminder that the book of Genesis is not a fictional story of mythological events. It's a historical narrative about real people in real places. Thirdly, to follow the line of Canaan, to keep with the prophecy of Genesis 9, we learn exactly who is involved in the descendants of Canaan. Remember that the book of Genesis was written to the Israelites in the wilderness, who would soon be going into the promised land. Canaan was the father of the 7 nations to be driven out of the land of Canaan by the Israelites under Joshua. Israel would be commanded to destroy and displace the Canaanites. This chapter identifies who are the Canaanites, to give a sense of belonging and identity to the people of Israel. Everyone needs to know who they are and how they fit into the world. The Israelites have been a race of slaves. They need to know that they are much, much more than slaves. They are a chosen people, have been called by God for a special purpose, to be lights unto the nations. So this is the account of Shem, Ham and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. The sons of Japheth, for example, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Japhan, Tubal, Meshach and Teras. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Rephtha and Togarmah. Sons of Japhan, Elisha, Tarshish, the Kittim and Rodamnim. Here we see them all scattered around the area. From Japheth came the nations of Persia, India and Europe. The nations that came from Japheth settled from India as far as the British Isles. Those who are called the maritime peoples are called the sea peoples by secular historians. Most of these also came from Japheth. More about that later. So here we have the Indo-European family of languages. A language is a great thing to be able to have a rough idea of what links people and where they come from and background. The descendants of Gomer moved northward, skirting the Black Sea, and then moved west into Central Europe. They gave rise to the Germans, the Gauls and the Celts. These 3 groups are mentioned as coming from Gomer. Ashkenaz. The people of Ashkenaz settled to the north of Mesopotamia near a lake that still bears the name Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz was the Assyrian word for the Scythians, the rugged horsemen who roamed the lands of northern Assyria. Roman mythology had Ashkenaz of Troy, escaping the fall of Troy and journeying to Italy, where he gave rise to the Latins. Riphath, Josephus describes him as the ancestor of the Paphlagonians, a people who lived in the Black Sea to the west of the Hellas River. Togarmah gave rise to the people of Armenia. Tradition has it as Togarmah was the ancestor of the Turkic-speaking peoples. Ezekiel 27:14 makes reference to the people of Togarmah, trading in war horses and mules with the inhabitants of Tyre. Magog, the term Magog seems to refer to the land or people of Gog. Josephus identified Magog with the Scythians, but he seems to be using that as a general term for anyone living north of Mesopotamia. This family settled to the north of the Caspian Sea and included settlements along the northeastern shores of the Black Sea. Madai, they settled to the east of Mesopotamia, gave rise to a strong mountain people known as the Medes. One branch of the Medes joined with the Semitic Elamites to form the Persians. Japhan, the descendants of Japhan settled along the northern Mediterranean coast and gave rise to a number of people groups. The Mycenaean Greeks, early Italians, the Latins, early inhabitants of Spain, and later Hittites. Tubal and Meshech, these 2 tribes settled in the mountains of Armenia to the north of Assyria. Teras gave rise to Thracians in northeastern Greece. The Phoenicians and Hittites and several other nations outside Palestine were also Canaanites. The Phoenicians have a great history of sailing. We know they traded as far as the British Isles over 2,000 years ago. One of Jesus' apostles, Simon, was a Canaanite. We're indebted mostly to Joseph of Gamala, better known in his Latin name Josephus, for the identification and locations of the territories of these nations. Descendants of Ham. From Ham come several Middle Eastern nations, including the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Hittites, the Phoenicians and the Canaanites, as well as most of the nations of Africa. Ham means black in Hebrew. It's good to remember that it was not Ham who was cursed with the bane of slavery. It was Canaan, father of the 7 nations of Canaan, later conquered and made slaves by Israel, and these people were not black. picture of descendants of Ham. While we can largely identify the sons of Japheth as being Indo-European peoples, the descendants of Ham do not so easily fall into such a simple designation. There is not a single separate Hamitic language group that we find with the Indian European or the Semitic languages. The languages spoken by the nations making up the sons of Ham are far more diversified. Cush. This is a Hebrew term for Ethiopia, the lands along the Nile to the south of Egypt, from the first to the sixth cataract. Around 730 BC, the kingdom of Cush conquered Egypt, and the two kingdoms were joined for a period of 60 years until Egypt was invaded by the Assyrians. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who grew to be a mighty warrior on earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That's why it's said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter. It is doubtful the narrator would interrupt the genealogy to point out somebody was a good archer. Before the Lord, in defiance of the Lord. A mighty hunter, probably a hunter of men, a warrior, a conqueror. Nimrod is called a mighty hunter, while Esau is called a skillful hunter. Both of these men demonstrate a desire for independence from God. Noah, he built an ark and an altar. Nimrod, he built a tower and a city. Noah, he was God-centered. Nimrod was self-centered. Noah, he became a farmer. Nimrod, he became a hunter. Noah, his name means rest. Nimrod, his name seems to mean rebel. Already described Noah as a second Adam who goes out to replenish and fill the earth following its recreation. We can also see that Nimrod is a second Cain who goes out from the presence of the Lord to build a city in the kingdom. The kingdom begins with Babel, but doesn't stop there. It takes in a number of city-states throughout Mesopotamia. There is a sense in which you will find yourself serving one king or the other. You will either follow in the footsteps of the one who attempts to build up his own kingdom, or else you'll follow the one who gave his life that we might enter his kingdom. We can also see a contrast between Nimrod, the mighty hunter, versus the one who is still mightier, yet who chooses to call himself instead the Good Shepherd. For example, Nimrod, mighty hunter, Jesus, the Good Shepherd. Nimrod rules over Babel, Christ rules over his new kingdom. Nimrod, rebellion against God, Christ, submission to God. In Genesis 10, he built the foundation of his empire in the land of Babylonia with the cities of Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. Genesis 11:12, from there he extended his reign to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, Rezin, the main city of the empire located between Nineveh and Calah. Verses 10-11 we learn Nimrod's kingdom spanned two great lands. It began in the land of Shinar and also took in the land of Assyria. These lands encompassed both southern and northern Mesopotamia, called thus by the Greeks because it was the land between two rivers. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon. From that land he went to Assyria. He built Nineveh and Rezin. Historicity of this account. In times past, all these cities were considered as mythical. Let me repeat that. In times past, all these cities were considered as mythical because only the Bible talked about them. A Bible mistake. Now, all these cities are known to be historical. When Calah was discovered and excavated, some tablets referred to it as the city of Nimrod. The first empire that could be called a world empire was founded by Nimrod, a Hamite, in what is now Iraq. This has been called the Old Babylonian Empire. Much later in history, the Neo-Babylonian Empire or the New Babylonian Empire was ruled by Nebuchadnezzar, a Semite. The king who took the nation of Judah into exile and destroyed Jerusalem in 586-7 BC. The very ancient Assyrian and Sumerian accounts also refer to Nimrod and Nimrod. The Caphtorim were of the same race as the Mizraite people, who were the Egyptians. Mizraim was the ancient name for the Egyptians. They settled up and down the Nile River for the ancient borders of Egypt didn't extend past the Nile River Valley. This passage tells us of a number of other people of groups that descended from the Mizraim. We know more about Egypt today than we do about Babylon. Luddim, these were Lydians who lived in western Anatolia, literally the flames. The Houghton, this seems to be a reference to Lower Egypt. The land of Egypt is divided into two parts. Lower Egypt is the north and takes in the Nile Delta. Upper Egypt is in the south and involves the length of the Nile River. Pathros is reference to Upper Egypt and includes the cities of Luxor and Thebes. The lands of Upper and Lower Egypt were considered by the Egyptians to be two separate lands joined under a single pharaoh. Thousands of years later, this distinction would be maintained, as the pharaoh's crown would bear the symbols of both Upper and Lower Egypt. Casluhim, from which came the Philistines and the Caphtorim. The Casluhim and Caphtorim are both said to be the ancestors of the Philistines. Amos 9:7 describes the Philistines as being from Caphtor. Caphtor is said to be the original capital of the Philistines. The name is found written in hieroglyphics in the temple of Kom-Omdus in Upper Egypt. If the Caphtorim were sea peoples, as many students of ancient history think, then they came to Egypt but were driven out by Ramesses III to settle along the coasts east and north of Egypt. The exact location of Caphtor is unknown. Caphtor is thought by some to be an ancient name for the island of Crete. Since the Philistines seem to be meant by the Japhethites in 1 Samuel 30 verse 14. If so, this was the home of the Minoan civilization, and their colonies are in evidence throughout the Mediterranean world, including the lands along the southern coast of Israel. Then verse 6, Put, the third son of Ham. This is thought to be ancient Libya, located to the west of Egypt. The descendants of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Canaan, he is the son of Ham, who had been accursed by Noah in the previous chapter. This was especially significant to the Israelites, to whom Moses wrote the book of Genesis. They would soon be facing the Canaanites in battle when they came into the land. The battle ahead is the reason that we are told the specific borders of the lands of Canaan. Canaan was the father of Sidon and is firstborn of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvidites, Semite, Hamites. Later the Canaanite clans scattered. This narrow strip of land provided a land bridge from Mesopotamia to Egypt. It was strategically located in what was in that day the centre of the world. In addition to this territory, descendants of the Canaanites also gave rise to a number of other people groups. Sidon was a city located on the Mediterranean to the north of Israel. It was the chief of the cities of the Phoenicians. They went on to become a race of sailors whose ships travelled the length and breadth of the Mediterranean, planted colonies in Sicily, Spain, and Africa. Canaan's next son was Heth. These are the forerunners of the original Hittites. However, they were eventually overrun and amalgamated into the Indian European people, who took for themselves the same name and eventually became the Hittite kingdom. And in the early 1900s, the Hittites were described as a Bible myth, and then the archaeologists dug them up. The Jebusites, those who were the original inhabitants of the city of Jerusalem. The Ammonites, though the Ammonites were a distinct people group, they grew so large it became customary to speak of all Canaanites as Amorite. 19. And the borders of Canaan reached from Sidon towards Gerar as far as Gaza, then towards Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim as far as Lasha. Here I describe the boundaries of the land of Canaan and the ancient Canaanites. From Sidon and the border of Lebanon in the north to Gaza in the south along the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, then east to somewhere below the southern tip of the Dead Sea, then up to the Jordan River, back to the foot of Mount Lebanon. These are the sons of Ham by their clans and languages and their territories and nations. Sons were also born to Shem, whose older brother was Japheth. Shem was an ancestor of all the sons of Eber. The sons of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, Aram, sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, Meshech. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah, and Shelah the father of Eber. The Israelites are told this so that they can be assured of their own place in this table of nations. Abraham eventually came down this line. The purpose of the account is so that they might know their own place in the world. The descendants of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The Elamites settled to the east of Mesopotamia. They later combined with the Medes to produce the Persians. This was the ancient name of Assyria, Ashur. This is different from Syria. The Assyrians lived in the northern part of Mesopotamia along the Tigris River. Arphaxad, we don't know the meaning of this name. Some have thought it to be related to the Hebrew word for healing. It is through him that Abraham and the Jews would be descended. Josephus maintained that he was the ancestor of the Chaldeans. Lud, this may be a reference to Lydians who settled in southern Anatolia. Aram gave rise to Armenians. Their capital city was Damascus. They spread out over the plains of Syria to the northeast of Canaan. From Shem came the Semites and probably the far eastern Asiatics, Mongols, native peoples of the Americas, Chinese and Japanese, etc. From Eber or Heber came the Hebrews. The Jews are Semites and Hebrews. The Arabs are also Semites. A seed line of redemption came down from Seth through Noah, Sheba, and Eber. 2 sons were born to Eber. One was called Peleg, means division, because in his time the earth was divided. His brother was named Joktan. There's always a Scotsman somewhere. Joktan was the father of Almodad, Japheth, Hadram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. In Genesis 10:25, Eber had 2 sons. The first was named Peleg, division, for during his lifetime the people of the world were divided into different language groups and dispersed. Another theory about the division of the earth in Peleg's day is that the Great Rift Valley split apart, separating the Arabian Peninsula from Africa and forming the Red Sea. This idea is developed on a webpage called Peleg's World. The region where they lived stretched from Mesha towards Sephar in the eastern hill country. These are the sons of Shem by their clans and languages in their territories and nations. These are the clans of Noah's sons, according to lines of descent within their nations. From these the nations spread out over all the earth after the flood. There are a total of 70 names given in this table of nations. So we also count Noah, his wife and 3 sons, we have 75. This could be significant later in the book of Genesis. When the Israelites entered Egypt in the days of Joseph, we read that all the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 75 people in the ancient Hebrew text. Is this a coincidence? Not according to Moses. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of your generations. Ask your father. He will inform you, your elders, and they too will tell you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of man, he set the boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of Israel. For the Lord's portion in his people, Jacob, is the allotment of his inheritance. This is seen in the ministry of Jesus when he appointed 70 disciples and sent them out to every city and place where he himself was going to come. They were going out to the land of Israel, but that was only a precursor of the day when the disciples would be sent out to the whole world. Moses says the boundaries of the people are according to the number of the sons of Israel. This means Israel will eventually be seen as a microcosm of the entire world. What is true of Israel would also eventually be true for the world. The blessing given to Israel in the Abrahamic covenant would extend outward to be a blessing to all men. In chapter 10 we've seen the genealogies of the sons of Noah, the descendants who repopulated the earth after the great flood, the table of the nations including those who were born before as well as those after the great dispersion from the Tower of Babel. We will read about the building of the tower, the confusion of languages, and the dispersal of the nations in chapter 11. If you've got something out of this lesson, please feel free to come back and join us again.